be to God. All right, perfect. This is what it says. It says, he told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it was the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches. He told them still another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all the way through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. This is the word of the Lord. Thank you so much. You can be seated. Working our way through the Gospel of Matthew, and I'm loving it. We're about halfway through, which means we have a lot still in front of us. We'll break that up over the next few months with some other stuff that we've got going. But what we are in right now is we are in a section where there are a ton of parables, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But I want to relate it to one of my absolute most favorite things to talk about, my lawn. Okay, yeah, we're going to get excited about lawns today, all right? That's what we're going to do. I absolutely love this time of year, this late spring, the sunshine. How many people had great time in the sun yesterday? Yeah, okay. If you didn't, I'm sorry. Hopefully you can get out and enjoy it today. But I absolutely love this time of year. And one of my favorite things about this time of year is when a nice green lawn comes to life. That deep green grass growing so fast that I have to cut it at least once a week. Now, over the last few years, I have been working really hard to get my lawn into good shape. Any green thumbs out there? Few of you that are proud. Okay, so this is the worst analogy ever. What you're telling me right now is you have no patience and you need counseling. Okay. A few of my neighbors have really impeccable lawns. Actually, Dan Castillo lives in my neighborhood. He knows this. His lawn is nice as well. And part of me just really enjoys a good lawn. But part of me feels responsible to also have a good lawn because my neighbors have a good lawn. Does that make sense? Anybody else there? Yeah? Okay, still nobody. All right. Pastor Jess, I'm about to turn this over to you, okay? Now, this has at times led me to be a little obsessed about something silly like a lawn. In fact, I knew it was getting a little out of hand when my daughter, who was at the time, this was a few years ago, 7 or 8 years old at the time, was really upset about the annoying dandelions. Now, if you have kids or you've been around kids, you know that 7-year-old kids do not typically find dandelions annoying. They actually really like them. So I knew that it was my fault that she felt that way at all. I wish I could say that I feel better about dandelions. I don't. I have just chosen to keep my problems to myself now for her benefit and for everyone else's, right? But honestly, caring for my lawn and working hard to get it into the shape that it's in has taught me a number of valuable lessons, right? There's all kinds of things in this life that sort of create this painstaking process in our life, and it teaches us things. It teaches us a lot. Now, it taught me that I can indeed, or it's teaching me rather, that I can indeed have the lawn that I want. I want the perfect lawn, right? I can have that, but it's going to take a lot of work. Having a nice lawn takes a lot of work. And I have to have the patience to let my lawn become the lawn that I want. Right? Because where we live, it can take a number of years to take a lawn that is dry or full of weeds. It can take years, season after season of slow transformation, caring for it, cutting it, watering it, so many things to go in. The process can be very tedious. But the good thing is if you have a good plan and you stick with it, you will indeed begin to see some fruit. Now, spiritual transformation can be a lot like growing a nice lawn. All right, you're like, okay, now we're getting it, right? If you do it well, over time you will see what tends to be a sparse and dying lawn grow into a healthy lawn. But if it's neglected, a healthy lawn can quickly turn brown and be overrun by dandelions, which we do not like. If you want a nice lawn, if you want your lawn to be healthy and growing, then it's going to take attention, it's going to take energy, it's going to take time. And the same is true for a vibrant spiritual life. The exact same thing is true. It's going to take attention. It's going to take your energy. It's going to take time for you to find that vibrant spiritual life. But here's the difference between lawn care and spiritual transformation. You can't pay somebody else to do your spiritual transformation. I'm sorry. You thought maybe I was going to offer that today. It's just not possible. And so in just a minute, we're going to study another teaching from Jesus where he is going to teach about the nature of the kingdom of heaven. And the analogies that Jesus uses, they all illustrate that we can have the life that we really want. But it is going to take time and attention and energy. So last week, we were introduced to parables, which is this teaching tool that Jesus uses to illustrate the truths about the kingdom of heaven. Maybe you're familiar with parables, maybe you're not, but here's what they are. The term parable means literally to place beside. And so what it is it's a picture of something that Jesus uses to help illustrate the truths of the kingdom of heaven. Maybe a story, or maybe it's something that you've worked with regularly every day, something that you might interact with. He takes that truth and he puts it next to the kingdom of heaven truth, tries to make it relatable. That's what a parable is. So last week, we looked at the parable of the sower. Now, this parable uses the illustration of a farmer sowing seed. Now, what's cool about it is many scholars believe that while Jesus was actually teaching about a farmer sowing seed, because of where they were, there were probably farmers literally sowing seeds, right? So we don't really live in this agrarian culture. In fact, none of you even take care of your lawns, apparently. So hopefully this will relate, but in that point in time, Jesus was nailing it head on, right? Like he was really like, this is going to be a super helpful picture. That's what a parable does. And the parable is helpful in understanding how we respond to the work God is doing in our life based on the condition of a soul. So God's distributing seed in the parable of the sower. It falls on various types of soil, and depending on how good the soil is how good the seeds grow. Now, this parable also highlights the reality that there is a very real enemy who is working very, very diligently to steal away any of the work that God is trying to do in your life. So if you missed last week and you feel like you can relate to any of that, I would go back and I would check it out. But this week we encounter another parable. In fact, we encounter 3 parables to be specific, and all of these parables have a very similar theme. They involve seeds or seed-like things. Only this time the seeds represent something differently. So last week the seeds represented what God was doing in the lives of an individual. This time they represent various other things, which we'll talk about in a sec. Now, at the beginning of our service just a few minutes ago, I actually read to you the middle section of the whole section we're going to cover today. In case you were really paying attention, you were like, hey, Pastor Rick, why did you skip the section of the parable on the weeds? We're not skipping it. I'm going back to it right now. I know you were all wondering that, right? We're like, he didn't preach on this last week. We're going back to it now, and then it'll make sense what Jesus is doing, okay? So I'm going to read to you from Matthew 13, verses 24 through 30. This is what it says. It says, Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while everyone was sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the wheat sprouted and formed heads, then the weeds also appeared. The owner's servant came to him and said, Sir, didn't you sow good seed in your field? Where then did the weeds come from? An enemy did this, he replied. The servants asked him, Do you want us to go and pull them up? No, he answered, because while you are pulling the weeds, you may uproot the wheat with them. Let both grow together until the harvest, and at that time I will tell the harvesters, First, collect the weeds and tie them into bundles to be burned. Then I will gather the wheat and bring them into my barn." So this parable, this seed parable, is teaching us again about the nature of the kingdom of heaven, but from a different perspective than last week's parable. We have the sower who planted good seed in his field. However, there has also been bad seed planted by an enemy of the sower. The seed that the enemy sows is a weed that could potentially spoil the entire crop. Now, scholars and historians have identified the type of weed that's specific to this story, and it's called darnel. Okay, now I'm going to put a picture of what a weed and the wheat look like together. That is wheat and darnel side by side. Pretty hard to distinguish, right? Pretty difficult to understand, especially as a seedling. It looks almost completely identical. And so by the time it sprouts up, it's too late in the process. The weed's roots have grown into the wheat's roots. And if you try to uproot the weed, you will also uproot the wheat. And so for this reason, in our story, in our parable, the farmer tells the farmhands to wait until the harvest to do anything about the darnel. Then Jesus moves on to the parable that we read at the beginning. This is what he says. It says he told them another parable. "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds come and perch in its branches." Again, Jesus is highlighting that this parable starts with "the kingdom of heaven is like." So I want to take just a few minutes and just remind us of what the kingdom of heaven is, why it's significant, why does Jesus take so much time and energy to teach on this. Now, most people understand the concept of heaven and hell. Even people who don't go to church, people who don't believe in God or Christianity, they understand that there's some type of heaven and hell. You hear that language all the time. And it's likely that most people think of heaven as some far-off place that they might go to after they die. However, biblical eschatology, which is the study of the end times, actually paints for us a different picture than that. Heaven and earth are actually different spaces, but they are separated by nature. Like their nature is different, but they can actually operate in the same place. Let me give you some examples. The earliest example of where heaven and earth can overlap is the Garden of Eden, right? So we have the Garden of Eden where God was walking with and talking with like Adam and Eve, and the space between heaven and earth was overlapping. They were different, but the nature of them were together. They were in the same place. And then after that, after the fall, after that was done and over with, God actually gives them his presence, and his presence dwells in the tabernacle and then the temple. So the tabernacle and the temple were significant because that's where the presence of God dwelt, but it was also the place where heaven and earth overlapped. And eventually what we see in the Bible is that heaven and earth will be reunited again completely as they were in the garden. And we see an image of this in the book of Revelation. So I want to read to you from Revelation 21, 1 through 5. It says this: "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Look, God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them, and they will be his people. And God himself will be with them and be their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away.' He who was seated on the throne said, 'I am making everything new.' Then he said, 'Write this down, for these words are trustworthy and true.'" So this passage actually shows us our eventual reality, a new heaven and a new earth coming together again. The restoration of God's creation completed, the redemption, if you will, of God's creation coming together. And all of this has been initiated by Jesus. Jesus himself is the space where heaven and earth overlap. the two different natures coming together and overlapping. So his arrival, his preaching and his teaching, and even his death and resurrection is the seedling of this redemption. The process has begun. The kingdom of heaven is growing, all because of Jesus. And that's why Jesus says the kingdom of heaven is like. Because he's forewarning, he's foreshadowing to his disciples, hey, the process has begun. Here is what it's going to look like. So then Jesus tells them another parable. He says in Matthew 13, 33 through 35, it says, he told them still another parable. And again, it starts with the same thing. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast that a woman took and mixed into about 60 pounds of flour until it worked all the way through the dough. Jesus spoke all these things to the crowd in parables. He did not say anything to them without using a parable. So was fulfilled what was spoken through the prophet, I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the creation of the world. So similarly, much like the mustard seed, the kingdom of heaven is now being related to yeast into dough. Now, I'm not sure how many bakers, right, we have in here. We maybe hopefully more than we have green thumbs. Anybody like to bake? Make some bread, maybe? Okay, all right. Jesus knew what he was doing. I love making homemade pizza dough, right? So I love this process. And one of the ingredients is active yeast. Now, once the yeast is introduced into the dough, it is completely inconspicuous. You cannot tell it apart from the rest of the dough. But what you can tell is the work that the yeast is doing. Because over the course of an hour or so, the dough ball that you form is now 2 or 3 times the size. Makes it very pliable, makes it actually turn into what you need to make pizza. So you don't actually see the yeast in the dough, but you definitely see the impact of the yeast on the dough. And so Jesus is showing the people around him, again, he's teaching them, this is how the kingdom of heaven is. It's like yeast in dough. And then Jesus finally moves on to explain what he meant by the parable of the weeds, which is our last section for today. In Matthew 13, 36 through 43, he gives them this explanation. He said, then he left the crowd and went into the house. His disciples came and said to him, explain to us the parable of the weeds in the field. He answered, the one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. The weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvesters are angels. As the weeds are pulled up and burned in the fire, so it will be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels, and they will weed out of his kingdom everything that causes sin and all who do evil. They will throw them into the blazing furnace where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine like the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Whoever has ears, let them hear. So Jesus leaves the crowd. He enters into a private residence with his closest disciples, and they ask him to explain this parable. Now, this encourages me. As I sat on this encourages me because there are times when the Bible takes a deep, long amount of studying to understand. Can you relate to that? Right? Sometimes you just don't really get what's going on. And it's also why I can read the same passage over and over in different stages of my life and take new and fresh meaning from it. Because again, there's a lot of layers, there's a lot of depth to Scripture. And so Jesus explains it to his disciples. They go, Jesus, please help us understand. That is encouraging to me. Sometimes we just need God to explain to us, to help us understand what's going on in these stories. So they ask, and he obliges, and he explains to them detail by detail, this is what I mean by the parable of the weeds. So let's just walk through it really quickly to remind ourselves what we see. The one who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. So the sower in this story is Jesus. And the field is the world. This is not to be confused by just the church or just Israel, but this is the entire world where he is sowing seed. The good seed stands for the people of the kingdom. That's people who live as followers of Jesus, citizens of the kingdom of heaven. Now, in this parable, the seed is different, if you remember, from the parable of the sower. The seed in the parable of the sower was the work that God was doing in us. Now the seed represents us, represents the kingdom of heaven and the work that God is doing among us. So the parable of the sower, work in us. Parable of the weeds, work among us. Then it says that the weeds are the people of the evil one, and the enemy who sows them is the devil. Now this highlights this very, very important reality. The devil is an expert at creating counterfeits. Counterfeits are designed to mimic the real thing, right? Like ladies in makeup, there's these things called dupes. Huh? No? They're like less expensive versions of the expensive makeup. Am I crazy, Tiffany? Help me out, right? Trying to relate, people. But it's counterfeit. It's not the real thing. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. Probably not as well as the real thing, right? That's what counterfeits are. They're less than the real thing. The enemy is an expert at sowing counterfeit lies, counterfeit realities into our life. So the weeds are the people of the evil one. Then it says that the harvest is at the end of the age, and the harvesters are the angels. Notice who is not the harvesters? Us. We are not the harvesters. We are not the final judge. We are not the one who gets to decide who's in, who's out, who's right, who's wrong. That's not our role. Instead, we are commanded to love God and to love and disciple people. And then Jesus ends the parable with the sobering reminder that at the end of the age, there will indeed be a great separation between the wheat, who we know are the followers of Jesus, and the weeds, who will be apart from Jesus, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So what do we observe in these parables? What do we observe Jesus teaching about? The kingdom of heaven. What's he trying to show his disciples? What's he trying to reveal to us? What's the impact that this should have on us as we consider it? Well, these parables show us the truth of the kingdom of heaven, but they also reveal the nature and character of God. They also reveal the nature and character of the people who are included in the parable. And so let's just briefly talk about what we see nature and character-wise in each of the characters who are in this parable. First of all, we have the sower. And we know that the sower is the Son of Man. And it says that the sower was sowing generously. We see that Jesus is a generous sower, very generous God. He's also patient. He doesn't uproot the weeds for fear of uprooting the wheat as well. He has patience. We have a generous and patient God. Then, of course, we have the enemy who is evil, but he's more than evil. He's also tricky, sowing bad seeds intentionally to try and destroy the entire crop. That's the enemy that we're talking about. And then being tricky, doing it in a way that creates these counterfeit weeds that are so similar to the real thing that to the untrained eye, a farmer might actually pull the wrong plant. So we have a generous and patient God, and we have a tricky, evil enemy. And then we see that we have two types of people. We have those who are the wheat, which we know to be the citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And then it says that we have those who are people of the evil one. Now, the language, in my opinion, is important there. It does not say that they are indeed themselves evil. They are not the source of evil. They are people of the evil one because they've been deceived, because they've been told that the counterfeit things in this life, the seeds that the enemy is sowing, is getting to them, and they become people of the evil one, but they themselves are not the evil one. Now, this is important. Why? This is important because it influences how we see the people around us. Ephesians 6:12 reminds us the truth about the nature of the evil one and then the people who are around us. This is what it says. It says, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms." So, just so we know, who is our battle against? The rulers of the dark world. Your neighbor who does not take care of their lawn is not the problem. I get it. But they're not the evil one. Right? People who think differently than you are not the evil one. Right? Some people have been deceived so badly that their life is in shambles, but they are not the evil one. They are the bad seeds because they've been deceived by the tricky, evil enemy. Galatians 6 encourages us even further in this matter. I want to read to you Galatians 6, 1 through 10. It says, "Brothers and sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, or you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. If anyone thinks they are something when they are not, they deceive themselves. Each one of us should test our own actions. Then they can take pride in themselves alone without comparing themselves to someone else. For each one of us should carry their own load. Nevertheless, the one who receives instruction in the word should share all good things with their instructor. Do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh they will reap destruction. And whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Now let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have the opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. Let us not grow weary doing good to all people. Let us do good to all people, especially those who are in the family of believers. You notice it does not exclude the person who is not in the family of believers. That is not an excuse to not do good to them. Right? That is not an excuse to say the things that we sometimes say or think the things that we sometimes think about them. And I will admit, I am guilty of all of that. But we're reminded in this parable that people around us are being deceived. They are being deceived by a tricky, evil enemy. And so until the harvest, we are challenged to not grow weary in doing good to all people. What a beautiful challenge we've been given. So what ties all of these parables together? Because again, we're still in the same chapter. Jesus is using a very similar theme, right? We've got seeds in all the parables, or seed-like things, even in the yeast. What ties them together is this reality. We cannot expedite the transformation of the kingdom of heaven. And we cannot expedite the personal transformation that we will receive as a result of the kingdom of heaven. Jesus' analogy of the mustard seed and the yeast, these things both start incredibly small. Now, if you have really active, quick yeast, then you got to wait an hour. That's best case scenario, right? Best case scenario. But sometimes you got to wait a lot longer. And if it's like the mustard seed, it starts so small, it's almost indiscernible to the eye, and yet it becomes the largest of garden plants, but it does not happen overnight. And I think as Christians, we are at times desperate for the reminder that growth can be a painstakingly slow process. Made even harder by the fact that the world we live in demands now, right? Now. Perform now. Be better now. Get it done now. Now I get it. I tell my daughter all the time, clean your room now. I mean it. But I also understand that it's going to take her a half hour or 3 hours, depending on how distracted she is, okay? We need to be reminded that we have a generous and patient God who is growing something, both around us and inside of us. Now imagine how silly it would be if a person planted a seed, maybe you've done this yourself, planted a seed and then just went out every single day, stared at the seed and said, "Grow faster!" Right? If that was your neighbor, you'd be like, "Bro, I gotta pray for you," right? Or if that neighbor walked out, looked at the seed and just was like so mad that it wasn't growing, "Grow faster, this is ridiculous." That person would be ridiculous, right? That person would actually be the person who has the issue, not the seed that's growing at the appropriate rate. Yet sometimes we treat ourselves as if we're the seed and we have a God who's yelling at us to grow faster when he is not at all yelling at us to grow faster, but patiently waiting, nurturing us. Right? Putting us in community like a local church where we can be cared for, giving us the word of God where we can learn the things that we need to do to create space to grow appropriately. God's character is patience. God's character is to nurture with good soil and fresh water and sunlight. In fact, if there's anybody that's the most frustrated about my slow growth, it's me. And I imagine that most of us can relate to that in certain areas. So many of us want to grow, and we want it to be quick, and we want it to be painless. We want it to get done. And when we don't, we're sad or even mad, and it leads to like us getting down on ourselves, or giving up on ourselves, or giving up on the things that we're doing that are creating the slow, beautiful growth. Meanwhile, we have this patient, loving gardener, this Son of Man who has sown generously into our lives and has given us everything we need to grow at an appropriate rate, including at times miraculous, growth spurts. But he's right there with us, planting the seed. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. The kingdom of heaven is like yeast. The kingdom of heaven is like wheat. And on God's timing alone will things be decided. So here are some questions that you can ponder this week as you reflect on this passage. Where can you see the kingdom of heaven breaking through in your life? And if so, are you celebrating that? Are you celebrating that by praising God and thanking him for being generous and for being patient? Because if you're not, you're shortchanging yourself. Find where God is growing you and celebrate that, even if it's slower than you want. Even if it's more painful than you wish it to be, the fact of the matter is you are growing, and that is good. Second question, where do you need to lean in to where God is trying to grow you? Where is the kingdom like yeast in your life? It may be inconspicuous on the surface, but you can feel the transformation happening in your life. You may even be fighting the transformation. No, God, I don't want that. But once the yeast is in, the work's going to happen. Third question, what counterfeit seed or what counterfeit seeds is the enemy trying to sow in your life? Where are the lies? Where are the things that feel like they might be better? They may seem to grow faster or with more ease, but eventually they'll be made to be like the darnel, producing no seed, producing no fruit, only yielding pain. And if you're not sure, you can ask God to reveal this in you so that he can help you work through it. So in closing, I'm going to have the band come on up in just a moment. We're going to do communion. I want us to take from this section, from these parables, an encouragement. Because in this section, we have this incredible reminder that the kingdom of heaven is at work every second of every day. Meaning, when you look at the world with all joy, life is awesome, you're with your friends, you're having a good time, you're at church, praising God, things feel good, the kingdom of heaven is at work. And also, when you're in the worst spot you've been in months, and your kids are driving you crazy, your roommate is terrible, the neighbor hasn't mowed their lawn, right? Lost your job, can't find the job you actually want, somebody's sick, right? You don't have the money you need to get the thing that you need or that you want. Whatever it may feel like, the kingdom of God is still growing. And that's good news for us. Because eventually, like we were reminded in Revelation, there will be no more tears, there will be no more sorrow, there will be no more pain, there will be a new heaven and a new earth, fully restored, including all of our broken bodies, all of our broken souls, all of our broken and hurting emotions, all of that restored. And that work is happening right now. Sometimes it's very evident, sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's easy to celebrate, sometimes it's not. But my encouragement would be to resist the discouragement. I'm not saying don't be sad when sad is appropriate. I'm saying trust that you have a patient, loving gardener who's with you. That in the nighttime, when there's no growth, he's with you. Do not grow weary in doing good. That's the reminder we have today. Will you stand with me? We're going to pray and receive communion together. Now, I recognize, as in my own life, each one of us carries something weighty, probably in here today. Sometimes that weight is sort of noticeable, and sometimes it's overbearing. Sometimes it's just unbelievably painful. But I want to tell you that regardless of what level of pain and weight that is, that you should get prayer. Because prayer matters and prayer works. And we have an awesome prayer team standing right over there underneath the storm sign. Really easy to see. And they want to pray for you. And they want to pray with you. Because the kingdom of heaven is at work in your life. And there are things that are painful about that right now. So please do not miss the opportunity to be prayed for. And then the reason why we celebrate communion the way we do is because it's this tangible, tastable, touchable reminder of God's grace. That even when we feel dry and not growing and heavy and just completely like nothing is going right, we receive communion because we have a gracious, loving God who still loves us, who loved us before we existed, who loved us despite our failings. That's the beauty of Jesus. And so when he told his disciples, hey, do this in remembrance of me, what a gift, because we don't just get to think about it, we actually get to consume it. Now in our tradition, it's juice and a cracker. Other traditions do it differently. But it represents so much more than that. It's the body and the blood. It represents the sacrifice that Jesus did on our behalf so that we can remember his grace. And so I'm going to pray for the elements and for the Christ followers in the room. This is a significant moment because you get to remember what God has done for you, what Jesus has done for you. I'm going to pray, and then if you want to be prayed for, please go do that. If you would like to receive the communion elements, please do that. And then we're going to sing one more song. So God, we come to you and we thank you for these reminders. We thank you for these parables that teach us about the nature and character of the kingdom of heaven and of our God, who is like a farmer patiently sowing seed, patiently waiting for us to grow, nurturing us, caring for us, proud of us. God, I pray that we would not be deceived by the counterfeits, that we would not be told lies and believe them. And God, that we would not give up on the growth, that we would not give up on our surroundings because we are discouraged. But rather, God, may we be lifted up, may we be encouraged. May we receive prayer where prayer is needed. God bless these communion elements as we receive them in Jesus' name. Amen. We can receive the elements now.